Um, so with that, I'm going to move, right into part one, those before me. And before we get to the poem, what I want to do is talk about a little bit about mental health history in the LGBTQ plus community, which really sets the backdrop for the first poem and the first reading. So the first thing I wanted to read to you is a letter, um, and this letter is from the year 1935, and this is from Sigmund Freud, who you all know, who is often called, the father of psychology, the father of psychoanalysis, and this is called Letter to an American Mother. Dear Mrs. Jane Doe, I gather from your letter that your son is a homosexual. I am most impressed by the fact that you do not mention this term yourself in your information about him. May I question you why you avoid it? Homosexuality is assuredly no advantage, but it is nothing to be ashamed of. No vice, no degradation. It cannot be classified as an illness. We consider it to be a variation of the sexual function produced by a certain arrest of sexual development. Many highly respectable individuals of ancient and modern times have been homosexuals, several of the greatest men among them, Plato, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, etc. It is a great injustice to persecute homosexuality as a crime and cruelty too. If you do not believe me, read the books of Havelock Ellis. By asking me if I can help you, you mean, I suppose, if I can abolish homosexuality and make normal heterosexuality take its place. The answer is, in a general way, we cannot promise to achieve it. In a certain number of cases, we succeed in developing the blighted germs of heterosexual tendencies which are present in every homosexual. In the majority of cases, it is no more possible. It is a question of the quality and the age of the individual. The result of treatment cannot be predicted. What analysis can do for your son runs in a different line. If he is unhappy, neurotic, torn by conflicts, inhibited in his social life, analysis may bring him harmony, peace of mind, full efficiency, whether he remains a homosexual or is changed. Sincerely yours, with kind wishes, Freud. So we can see that, in 1935, this isn't a perfect response, right? It's not something that would be acceptable today, especially the last part. But, the first part, he's saying this is not an illness. This is normal. Um, and it should not be considered an illness, or it should not be criminalized. And then later we have Dr. Alfred Kinsey, who comes along, and famous psychologist who studied sexual behavior. And he conducted pioneering work and studies on sexual orientation in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And we have this long book called the Kinsey Report that sort of shows all of his findings. And his research uncovered the existence of a broad spectrum of sexual orientation between straight and gay. And he developed a continuum. And his research uncovered that approximately 10% of the adult population identified in the range of 4 to 6, or from predominantly gay to exclusively gay. While most in the scientific community believe this estimate is too high at 10%, it nevertheless revealed that being a sexual minority was not uncommon, even in the 1940s and the 1950s. So then again, we have this another psychologist in the 1950s, and his name is Charles Socarides. And he went the other way. He did not agree with Freud or Kinsey, and he believed that being gay was a mental disorder and that conversion therapy was effective and preferred. As an aside, years later, his son actually came out as gay. But his opinions provided anti-LGBT forces of the time with scientific backup, even though those forces were not driven by science to begin with. So then in the early 1950s, the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, published what they called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. They call it the DSM. It's known as the Bible of Mental Disorders. And the APA skipped over Freud, skipped over Kinsey, and went with Socarides. And they classified being gay as a mental disorder of the sociopathic personality disturbance variety of personality disorders, right alongside pedophilia. So why did they do this? This was likely the influence of religion. And when I talk about religion today, I do want to say, as an aside, um, I'm an attorney. I studied the Constitution. I support the freedom of religion. I also support freedom from religion. So if you hear me talking about religion in a negative manner, it's only because I'm talking about the harmful effects that it's had in certain instances, or the harmful effects that it's had on me. And I fully recognize that religion can also have positive effects, just as an aside. So certain things were happening in the 1950s. President Eisenhower at the time was bringing religion more into the role of public life and government, introducing things such as inaugural prayers and the National Prayer Breakfast. At the same time, Congress added the phrase "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, and "in God we trust" to our currency, um, which a lot of people don't know, but both of those things did not exist until the 1950s. Um, and the religious surge of the 50s and the underlying culture seemed sufficient enough to influence even scientists to side with Socrates rather than Freud or Kinsey. And we also had this anti-communist wave happening, right? And religion was a big part of that anti-communist wave, because Americans then saw the communists as anti-religious, and so they sort of went full throttle the other way with religion, as to sort of to combat that communism. Additionally, there were flaws in the scientific methodology that people, psychologists like Socrates were using. And a couple of those were, they were starting out studying subjects who were already coming to psychologists with psychological issues. So a lot of the subjects they were studying already had pre-existing psychological issues. And then they didn't account for the fact that mental and emotional disturbances of sexual minorities were often caused by living in a culture that already rejected them. Um, and I would say, even for myself, that's the case. That's something I've struggled with, having my own issues, and people in my life thinking that they're caused by the fact that I'm a gay male, but they're not. It doesn't come from me being gay. I think a lot of it comes from society and the things that happened to me when I was younger because I was gay. So I don't think there's like a direct correlation, and it's definitely, obviously, we know it's not, being gay or a sexual minority is not proof of a mental disorder. So the APA voted in 1973 to remove being gay from the mental disorder list after Dr. John Fryer, a psychiatrist, disguised himself and addressed the APA through a voice distorting microphone, stating, "I am a homosexual, I am a psychiatrist." And although it's not one of the poems I'm going to read today, if you have the book, or if you plan on picking up a copy, there is a poem called "Grotesque" in the book about Dr. John Fryer. At the same time, they removed being gay as a mental disorder. They added gender identity disorder. But at the time, they defined it as those preoccupied with their wish to live as a member of the opposite sex. So we're starting to get to a place where we are at least acknowledging other kinds of sexual minorities exist, but our descriptions and our inclusions of them, in these scientific journals are not yet where they need to be. And in 2013, the APA dropped gender identity disorder and added gender dysphoria. So they're shifting the focus away from the definition of, pathology, just to a simple recognition that one's birth gender and gender identity do not always align. And sometimes, medical assistance is needed to help resolve that conflict. So with that background, now we come to the story of a man named Gene Ampon, um, who is the subject of the first poem reading. In the early 1960s, Gene Ampon was involuntarily committed to Atascadero State Hospital and locked in solitary confinement. Note that this is during the time when being gay was officially and medically considered a mental disorder. So this is between 52 and 73. Atascadero State Hospital specialized in the treatment of sexual deviants, but they confined and mistreated gay men. Patients were entrapped, targeted, and arrested for gay behavior and committed and often committed by judges for evaluation and or indefinite treatment. And they were able to do that because this was included, in this DSM as a mental disorder. So treatments at Atascadero included electroshock therapy, solitary confinement. Um, uh, Jean Ampon was in solitary confinement with nothing but a thin sleeping mat, was forced into aversion therapy, including treatment involving the use of a drug called anectine, which paralyzed patients and gave them the sensation of drowning. While in solitary confinement, Jean, at 16 years old, wrote the following short poem. Spider, spider, along the ceiling slide, spin your prison cell, locking me inside. Now should my fearful trembling send a tremor through your web descent, then it is true what I surmise, that men their dreadful dooms devise. So this brings us to the first poem reading, which is called Atascadero. And you can think of this as a poem within a poem. I think the kids call that meta now. But this poem is a conversation between Jean and the spider in his solitary confinement cell as a means of escapism. Atascadero. What did you do, Ocho, to be trapped with me inside these concrete walls, to swelter here, to count the beads of sweat that sting my eyes? Did your legs wander, Ocho? Did they wrap around to amigo like mine? Do they vibrate love codes through the wall to your secret lover on the other side? I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, Ocho. You can call me Jean. I'm 16. Please stay up there in the corner. I'd hate to squash you in my sleep. This is Matt, Ocho, where I lie down. Yeah, I know he's skinny, Ocho. He's only slightly fatter than the ground. Do you smell the burning, Ocho, of those buzzing loud machines? The frying minds of our brothers? Do you hear their useless pleas? Give me jazz hands, Ocho, to swat away the anectine. Don't let them drown me, Ocho. I hear them coming now for me. Ocho, please don't leave. Raise that top hat, twirl that cane. When you're dancing, Ocho, I can barely feel the pain. Bravo, Ocho. Bravo, brav. And thus ends part one. So I don't know, Rebecca, if we have any questions or if anyone wants to ask any questions so far.